Hi, I'm John Calarco, Holistic Health and Performance Coach. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do a glute bridge correctly. Unleash your power, achieve your potential. If you have weak hips or glutes, or if you have a pelvis that's excessively tilted forward, we call this an anterior pelvic tilt, or if you have lower back pain or even hip pain, then the glute bridge is going to be a great exercise for you because it's going to help you to build the fundamental levels of stability and strength through your glutes, hips, and even your core. It's going to help you begin to correct your pelvis position and get you into more of a neutral pelvis position, which is going to take stress off your low back and allow you to get your glutes and your abdominals functioning better. And this can also be a great exercise to help you begin to rehabilitate low back pain and prevent lower back pain. So make sure you watch this video to the end so you can learn exactly how to do it precisely. Now, the glute bridge is an exercise you may have seen done before. It's commonly done in the gyms and even in physical therapy settings, but often it's commonly done wrong. Now, it's a really important exercise because it actually is one of the fundamental progressions in building the hip hinge pattern. Essentially, the glute bridge is just doing a hip hinge pattern laying on the ground. So if you don't know what the hip hinge pattern is, I've shown it in previous videos. It's when we hinge our hips straight back, all right, with a slight knee bend, keeping a neutral spine. It's kind of our bending over pattern that allows us to go ahead and pick things up off the floor, like when we're doing exercises like deadlifts or just picking something up throughout daily life. So you're going to see the glute bridge is essentially the same hip movement just laying on your back. So it's a great place to start to build the groove of that fundamental movement through the hip hinge pattern that will carry over to your standing hip hinge patterns, which will progress to, of course, you want to progress to after you build your strength in an exercise like the glute bridge. All right, so again, as the name says, the glutes are the primary muscle that we're going to be targeting here. Now, if you didn't know, the glutes actually are a group of 3 muscles, all right? You have the glute max muscle, which of course everybody knows. It's the most superficial glute muscle there that you can see. Then you have 2 more glute muscles that are underneath the glute max. You have one called the gluteus medius, which runs about right here on the lateral side of the glute, okay? And then you have the gluteus minimus, which is right under that gluteus medius. It's almost parallel to it, only it's smaller, hence the name minimus. And all 3 of those muscles work together to allow your hip and your glutes to function as they should. So the main glute muscle, the glute max, primarily extends the hip, like when you walk, it brings the hip back like this. It also is a main external rotator of the hip. So it rotates the hip like this, okay, or drives the knee out when we do that. And then it assists the glute medius and the glute minimus in this motion, which is abduction, okay? That's the primary function of the gluteus medius and the gluteus minimus is abduction and then internal rotation when the hip is being rotated, okay, inward like that. Now, another important thing to understand and why it's so important to train those other 2 muscles of the glutes is especially the gluteus medius. It functions as a very important stabilizer for the pelvis and for the hips, all right? That's its primary function. It definitely does, again, its main movements that it does is abduction and internal rotation, but the primary function of it actually is to stabilize the pelvis so that when you stand on one leg that you don't totally, drop your pelvis like that. It stabilizes and keeps that pelvis in a neutral position, and especially with gait, when you walk, it prevents you from having a pelvis that excessively, sways side to side when you walk. It helps to stabilize that position and keep you in great alignment. All right, so really important things to understand here. Now, to set up for that glute bridge exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to come onto the ground, all right? Now, I highly recommend always using a mini band when you do this exercise. So again, that's one of those points here about how we're going to get the most out of the exercise and really, do it in a way that just gets us the most bang for our buck if we're going to spend the time doing it. So I highly recommend, taking a mini band around the knees here, okay? And I'll explain why that's so important in just a minute. Now, to set up, you're going to lay onto your back. And what I like to do here to get your feet set in the optimal position is to take your knees up over your hips and get your knees bent at a 90-degree angle. Then plant your feet straight down into the ground from there, okay? That should get you at just about the right position. So when we get to the top, we have a 90-degree angle in the knee, which is what we want. So I'll show you, that in a minute here as we perform the exercise. Then I recommend pulling the ankles up towards the shins. That's going to get us more into the heel, so we drive the movement through the heel more, which is going to drive us through the glutes more. All right, also gets us some extra strength work in the lower leg muscles there as we're dorsiflexing and pulling the ankles up towards the shins. All right, then we're just going to lengthen out the spine. We're going to relax the arms at the sides. We don't want to really press and use the arms here. We want to put this all onto our hips and our core as we perform the exercise. All right, and then we're gonna initiate the movement. To initiate, we're gonna exhale through the mouth like we're blowing through a straw. What that's gonna do is start to engage the abdominals entirely and naturally get the pelvis tucked into a position where we wanna be to maximally activate the glutes. So I'm gonna exhale, all right, fully through my mouth like I'm blowing through a straw. And then from there, I'm gonna drive all the way up, trying to get my knees, hips, and shoulders in a straight line, fully contracting and squeezing through the glutes, which is what will naturally tilt our pelvis the way that we want it here. All right, and then nice and controlled, we're gonna return to that started position. So I'll show you a few reps. Exhale like you're blowing through a straw. Fully squeeze and contract the glutes. The exhale combined with that is gonna get you that optimal position of abdominal engagement and pelvis tucking. All right, one more. Squeeze, contract. Now, also, with this band, do not let that band pull the knees in. So that's why we have it in position there, all right? Now, of course, you're gonna feel the exercise in the glute muscles, the main glute muscles, as they drive you and extend the hip up. But, as I mentioned with the band, the importance of that is it's gonna force you, if you're focused on not allowing it to cave your knees in together like that, it's gonna force you to externally rotate and abduct your hips, which is gonna get those gluteus medius muscles firing, the gluteus minimus, and again, because the glute is also an external rotator of the hip, it's gonna activate the glutes more. So that's really how you can get the most out of this exercise, by adding the mini band. That's the importance of it. If you've seen it done with a mini band, now you understand. All right, so again, that's gonna be the primary areas that we're gonna feel it. The most common mistake to avoid here is overarching the lower back. All right, and that's exactly what we don't want to do here. As I emphasize the tucking of the pelvis, the exhaling to get the abdominals engaged, pelvis tucked, what we don't want to do is perform this exercise like this. We don't want to come up and arch the back excessively, just barely pushing to the glutes and mostly getting extension in the low back. All right, that's the biggest mistake to watch out for. So again, if you're exhaling through the mouth like you're blowing through a straw and you're really fully contracting the glutes at the top, that will naturally tuck the pelvis in the position that we want it to be in. So you're in a neutral pelvis position, or even slightly posterior pelvic tilt, and that's gonna get us the most activation in the glutes. But now, the caveat is, the second mistake is we don't want to be short on the exercise. So we don't want to get our full pelvis position and then be short on the exercise. We want to achieve full hip extension. So make sure that you get to full hip extension where the knees, hips, and shoulders are pretty much making a straight line at the top, all right? But still maintaining that pelvis position. So don't go higher and overarch the back. So again, that's the importance. Use that exhale, drive through those heels, fully squeeze the glutes, and you'll be set. You'll get to the highest position of hip extension that you can get to if you maintain that focus. All right, the last piece, I showed you a setup already to get the feet in a perfect position, but a common question is, how far should my feet be from my butt? Again, I think one of the best ways to set up is just taking your knees up to this position here. Knees are over the hips. Set your 90-degree angle in the knees here, and then just bring your feet straight down into the ground, driving so we can drive through those heels. All right, we don't want the feet to be too far from the hips here, because then that's going to get us much more of the hamstring. And there are different bridge variations that we can do, and I'll show you in the future videos of exercise to get more of the hamstring in a bridge, but that's not the purpose of this exercise. Now, the hamstring is a secondary driver of hip extension, so you're going to feel the hamstrings a little bit in this exercise, but again, if we get too far away, then we're going to get too much hamstring activation and take away from our main goal here. And then, of course, we don't want the feet too close to the butt either. That's going to get us more into our quads, and you may even feel like a stretch at the top in your quads. And again, that's not what we want. We want those knees at about a 90-degree angle at the top position. All right, so make sure that you avoid those mistakes there as you go through and perform the exercise. Now, in terms of sets and reps that you should do on this exercise, again, this is really more of a, I mentioned that this is a strength exercise for the hips and the glutes, and it will develop some strength in the glutes, but mostly we're working on the stabilizing muscles here, all right, in the lateral glutes, in the hips, in the core, to precisely work on our motor control and movement control through that hip hinge pattern. So whenever we're doing a stability-based exercise like that, we want to focus on a little bit higher repetition. So think about 2 to 3 sets of about 12 to 15 reps on this exercise, all right? As I mentioned, emphasizing at the top position, really that full contraction squeeze. You should be 2, maybe 3 seconds at the top, fully squeezing, and then nice and controlled down, about 2 seconds, nice and controlled up to really get that full squeeze. So again, work on motor control here, mostly in this exercise, and not traditional strength where we're kind of exploding up, maybe holding for a quick second, coming down. So think of this exercise more as a controlled exercise where we're working on developing some fundamental levels of stability and endurance in those stabilizing muscles. All right, in terms of when you should do this exercise, A great time, there are multiple great times to do it. The first one, we'll kind of go in order. After you do your mobility work, so after you do some good hip mobility, maybe you're doing a half kneeling hip flexor stretch, leg lowering exercises, hamstring band stretches, 90-90 hip mobility, all things I've shown you in the past. This is a great stability exercise to do right after those to, again, put some stability on top of the mobility that we started to open up with those mobility drills. All right, so that's a great time to do it. Then also, for the same purpose, but at the same time, we can use this exercise after our warm-up for good activation. So if you're doing it after mobility, you're killing two birds with one stone. You're stacking stability on top of the mobility, and then you're also getting great activation through the glutes so we can get them firing more, get them ready to perform better if we're going to be doing hip hinges after that in our strength program, or we're going to be even potentially doing some jumping where we want the glutes to fire better. Maybe we're doing some broad jumping, we're jumping for distance. The glute bridge will be a great exercise to get those glutes firing up more and get you ready to get more out of that activity in those exercises. Then it's also a great one to use at the end of a workout if you're just trying to do maybe a burnout in the glutes, or you're doing some type of a core circuit. It's a great exercise that fits there. Again, you could do it for those higher reps, even 15. You can go further than that if you want to, really do some work, just to get a little bit more of an endurance, maybe core conditioning effect. It can be used in that way as well. But oftentimes it's actually more beneficial to just add some resistance and load. So if this exercise gets easy, if you could do 3 sets of 15, with the mini band, and this is a pretty thin mini band that I have here, but you can get thicker ones and stronger ones. Again, if you're hitting a thick, strong mini band, 3 sets of 15, even 20 reps on this, you got more than enough strength. It's time to progress you on to single leg variations and even weighted variations, and maybe even the hip thrust where your back's now against a bench. All things that I'll show you in future videos. So make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you can get notified as I upload those future videos in this series of exercises where I'm gonna show you how to build the best levels of strength in your hips and glutes, and how that's gonna carry over into building your hip hinge movement pattern. All right. Also, drop a like on this video if this is helpful for you. Drop a like, drop any comments if you have any questions on this exercise in the comments below. And until the next one, unleash your power, achieve your potential.